So, hello to all. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Kiva, and I'm at M Squared. I have the privilege of working in our programming department, and some of our programs have turned online. So, if this is the first time you're experiencing the Value Spark, this is an approach to, or an attempt at least, to take some educational content and really put it in the shape of what an educational program could look like digitally. So we're actually using the language of programs when we speak about Value Spark. So this program is the one about humor. And the intention behind them is twofold. One, for educators like yourself to be able to go through these and think about values in real time as they play out, given all of the turmoil and excitement, so to speak, that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, but also, more so even, to give a ready-made lesson plan that can be taught from beginning to end by clicking on all the links or by selecting specific elements from various chapters or portions of the program to focus on with learners of your own. So if you're convening a group of teens or adults or college students or anybody to convene around a topic of substance, like one of these values, this is kind of a narrative that's already scripted and out there and should serve as a starting point. So this week's issue is about the value of humor, and is a little bit different than some of the heavy ones that we've been speaking about, like preservation and integrity. And we thought long and hard about, should this be our next one, and made the very conscious decision that yes, because amidst a lot of crisis and turmoil, humor sometimes can be our best friends and a necessary outlet in order to deal with grief on a very extreme situation, or otherwise just when there's a whole wealth of issues and emotions at play, humor is very much our friend. So welcome to Humor, Lightening the Dark. And we will do a round of intros at some point, but not just yet. We're actually going to get into this spark. I'm going to ask Haley to share. Oh, I haven't introduced Haley. Hi, Haley. For those of you who don't know, I think most of you know Haley, but Haley works in the program department and keeps us going. So Haley has a number of roles on this webinar. I don't see the chat function. I'm just not built to do that. I'm sorry. So you're welcome to write in the chat. And then if you have anything that I should address, Haley will draw my attention to it. But you are also encouraged to just say, like, Kiva, stop, and just take over the screen. And that's the better way to ask your question. So please, that's totally acceptable etiquette here. And then Haley will also be posting things in the chat box, because I'm going to be asking you to toggle between this screen and then some other screens as well, just to keep track of kind of where things are. So we're going to start off by getting into a Padlet board. So Haley, if you can please share this link of different types of laughter. And as we're going to get into this board, I'm sharing my screen, but you should all open this on your own screen. We are going to try and discern the various types of laughter. So we all know there's a nervous laugh, and there's a giddy laugh, and there's an excited laugh, and these all convey very different things. So the way we'll do this is, for the next 4 minutes or so, I'm going to ask you to keep yourselves muted, but turn up your volume so you can hear me press play over here. And then as the chuckles and laughter will be on behind you, scroll through this Padlet board and follow this prompt, which is underneath as many of these GIFs as GIF, whatever is possible. Write down what type of laughter you think is at play, and then what do you envision is like actually being said in that scene. So take a few minutes and just let's identify various types of laughter. We're going to do one more round of that, and when it finishes, we will. Okay, I'm going to pause this here. If you filled something in and you get a prompt that says like update, then click update, because then it'll refresh whatever you've added on this Padlet board. And awesome. Okay, there's some great ones here. And we're a small group right now, so I actually do want to do a quick wraparound of who's here, because we are going to start sharing some stuff throughout this webinar or throughout this presentation. And in doing so, just a bit, your name, where you're calling in from, and then if there's a particular GIF, is it GIF or GIF? Does anyone know? I feel like Sarah Beth, you would know. GIF? Yes?
Okay, I always have to ask a Gen Z colleague every time I attempt it, and I forget, but I think it's GIF, because
it's GIF. We're calling it GIF.
Yeah,
that works.
Whatever. I'm not quite.
Okay. So if there's a particular GIF that that you relate to, that sticks out to you, that's like that, I don't know, the particular scene or what it's representing, just go ahead and bring us into your worldview right now. So Haley, let's start with you. Actually, I'm gonna call on you. Exactly.
Okay.
Didn't see that coming. Name where you're calling
not
in
at
from
all.
and when that stands out.
Okay. I'm Haley. I'm calling in from Jerusalem. And seeing as I picked out all these GIFs, hold on, I'm just pulling it up again. It's really slow on my computer because it just doesn't like it. I happen to love the Issa Rae one, which is the one where she kind of throws her head back. Just because it's such you can tell that it's like not staged and that she's just reacting to something. And I think I laugh like that sometimes. So I love that one.
Awesome. Thank you, Haley. Danny, you're up.
Hello, my name is Danny. I am calling from Florida. You want me to do anything else about that, Kiva, or just go
Sure.
right in?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, you can quickly say what you do. You do something.
I was lucky enough to be part of the M-Squared cohort for camp professionals and loved it. Felt like I learned a lot too. So anything you guys do, I always support and like to further enhance some knowledge. So thank you for all that you've done there. And quite frankly, I feel very fortunate to do what I do, to work in the Jewish sports camp world. Makes me an educator, a Jewish educator, a coach, and all of which I think we got to keep developing and learning. So fit right in. On the Padlet, which I love, the first thing obviously was when I saw the Seinfeld clip, and maybe that just is me, is that it always just catches my eye because of, I guess, the role that show played. And I like it. I see a Friends one, obviously, that, you know, I like those shows. So that's what there. And then to see the kid laughing also caught me, because that's one of my favorite things. And we see that, thank goodness, a lot at camp is when you see a child just laughing, and it's real, it's authentic, it's as unstaged, or it's not part of a show or anything like that. So I love that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Danny. Michelle, you're next. I'm going to unmute you, I think. I'm going to try. No, it's not working for some reason. Okay, so in the chat box, we're going to move on to somebody else, but in the chat box, just write their name, where you're coming in from, and then if there was one scene that
so
okay?
she did, right? So I'll read hers. Michelle is calling in from the Bay Area in California, and she loved the Lucy one because, well, she's classically hilarious.
Amazing. So true. Thank you, Michelle. Robin.
Hi, I'm Robin. I'm calling in from the Boston area. I was in SEC 3. I was supposed to leave for Vermont Sports Academy today. I'm kind of bummed that I'm not there. And the one, the little girl in the second column laughing, just like the pure joy and happiness and like, I don't know if humor sometimes can release tension, but I just like keep my eye is like totally glued to her.
Amazing. Thank you, Robin. Aliza.
I'm speaking from Sunnyvale. I work at the congregation Netz Chaim. I'm teaching the 5th and the 8th grade there. And I was drawn to Trevor Noah and Hassan Minaj. I love their sense of humor. And yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Sarah Beth, you're up.
Okay, I'm Sarah Beth. I was in SEC 4, and I was really drawn to, I think it's Jennifer Garner in 13 Going on 30, if memory serves, where she's like laughing into the, or spitting out her coffee rather, because aerosolizing is no joke, but also I tend to respond to things by laughing like that a lot. That's me every day, because there's always something. And also, if I think I'm right about 13 Going on 30, that movie describes a lot about how I try to engage in this universe with a childlike sense of wonder.
Amazing. Thank you, Sarah Beth. Julie. Okay, you're on mute. I'm going to, can't unmute you. Is it working?
Did it work?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
They've already been mentioned. The little girl just that's laughing her head off just makes you so happy that she's living life and just having a good time. And the one where she's spitting out her coffee, because that's me. Yeah. I just start laughing and can't stop, and whatever's around me is around me. So those are the two that grab me.
Awesome. Thank you all. And Annie.
Yes, hi everyone. I am here in Kansas City, and I was a part of the Relational Engagement Cohort 1, which was a terrific experience, and I love what M Squared does. I just took a big pivot professionally. I was in Jewish education, working at Melton for many, many years, and just switched to philanthropy here at the Jewish Federation. And I loved the Schitt's Creek picture with Eugene Levy. And the reason why I connected with that is because that has been an escape. That show has really been an escape for my husband and I, you know, right now where there's nowhere to go, not traveling, not really going out at night, that we just kind of crawl in bed and watch the show and just, you know, it's just an escape. And so that has a lot of meaning for me now.
Amazing. Thank you, Annie. Good luck on the new move. And also humor as an escape is something that we're going to be speaking about soon. So for myself, this scene over here of her spitting out coffee, it's interesting based on what Julie and Sarah Beth said. I'm jealous that you get to experience that often. I can think of like very few times that happened to me, but is like probably the best moments that I can recall. Just like when it was so funny that I could not control myself and I just spit things out. So teach me your ways of doing that more. It's really awesome. Okay, so an intro to the Humor Spark. First of all, if you've already had a chance to scroll through this based on the newsletter yesterday, then you might know how this fits in or how we're using it. But nonetheless, you have a link to the Spark in the chat box, and we're going to use it in a particular way. Just as a bit of a frame, humor, as we're presenting this, or as I'm speaking about this, is in the context of a value. And there's questions: is humor a value? Is humor a tactic? There's a lot of questions over there. But humor as a value, in terms of being a way to deal with difficulty and tragedy, and the complexity or the conflict inherent in that value is that, like, is it appropriate? How do I do it? Is something that's humorous to me humorous to somebody else? There are so many types of humor. There's a lot of questions that come up with this. But the reason we are distinguishing between humor being a value and then laughter, which appears over and over again through the spark, is laughter is one expression of humor. And there are many, many other expressions as well. But we're going to go ahead with laughter based on that initial GIF. But I just want to name the fact that humor is much broader than laughter. And if that wasn't clear, then that should be. So how this Sparks works. There are 3 chapters. And those 3 chapters in this issue are, number one, that there are a multitude of emotions that we each carry, and that laughter can represent. And it tends to serve as a natural release when we are so pent up with emotions. And sometimes it can be like, trying to interpret what that emotional release is not always so simple for an outsider, and we're going to experiment with that, but it can represent so many different things. The second chapter of this is Jewish humor. Obviously, Jewish humor is a thing, but what is Jewish humor and how is it distinguished from other types of humor? As Jews, how do we personally relate to Jewish humor, and does it resonate, or does it go too far? Is it cathartic? All sorts of questions related to, like, the insular nature of humor. And chapter 3 is going to introduce one of the biggest challenges, or the risks with humor, which is the dark side. The dark side being that, by definition, anything that is, any inside joke has a connotation of, like, belonging, and therefore there's somebody who's excluded. And how do you maintain a sense of humor and use it effectively while being very mindful of how it can be directly at the expense of somebody else? So these are 3 different chapters. And the reason I'm outlining it like this instead of scrolling all the way through is because in this learning right now, I've chosen to focus primarily on chapter number 1. And if we have time, we'll get through to the other pieces, but for you to be able to see how it all fits together in case we don't cover all ground right now. And hello, baby Adele, you are beautiful. And it's nice to actually see you. Okay. So here we are. In order to get into this, we always start out, this is how we'll do it. I'm sharing my screen, so you shouldn't be looking at your Padlet link anymore. There's no need to do that, but just look at the Spark as I'll scroll through it. So we're starting off over here. We already did some laughter in the beginning, but had we not, I would start with this video, which just has all sorts of sounds and laughters that represent different things, very similar to what we did on the GIF board. And then we begin. What a year this week has been. Knock, knock, who's there? Nobody, because we are isolating. Robin, can you please read this first slide? In our current reality.
In our current reality, millions of people have flocked to humor for a sense of comfort, connection, and control. The Atlantic spells it out right here in, yes, make Corona jokes. There's been an outpouring of memes, funny videos, and general silliness. Amidst our fear, exhaustion, and anxiety, we seem determined to carry on laughing. Sometimes to deal with difficulty and tragedy, we need to laugh. The ability to find—
Pause for a minute. Sorry, I'm just going to cut you off for a minute. I want to focus on that one sentence. Sometimes to deal with difficulty and tragedy, we need to laugh. To the extent that this resonates with you on your screen, do like a yes, totally, or or like not so much. But just so the group is able to see how we relate to this claim. Sometimes to deal with difficulty and tragedy, we need to laugh. So I'm like this, but you should all do it at the same time, like okay. So hi Bobby, welcome. Hello. So for some, it's like, yes, I saw Sarah Beth, your hands just totally shot up, and you're like, yes, this is how we deal with difficulty and tragedy. And others are like, maybe I can be convinced, or I kind of feel this way, but it's not so easy, or there's other ways of interpreting that. But already from the bat, I want to name that if this is a claim that one way that we cope, not everyone kind of copes the same way. Robin, go ahead and continue with the ability.
The ability to find humor in the grimmest of circumstances is not only a survival tool, but a supreme act of creativity.
Okay, and when we get to this point about humor being a supreme act of creativity, a question that I have for educators is like, you know, do you have to be funny to use humor as a pedagogic tactic? And I would hope that the answer is no, because I don't think of myself as particularly funny and trying to elicit humor, at least in the early stages. So the question of, you know, it definitely requires creativity, but is it exclusive? If one doesn't see themselves as humorous, should they stay away from this? And there are real kind of questions about that. One other piece of framing before we get into it. Annie, can you read this about Jewish tradition?
Sure. Jewish tradition also recognizes that humor plays an important role in our lives. The Talmud relates the practice of the sage Rabbah, who before beginning to teach matters of Jewish law would say something humorous so that the sages might be cheered. Rabbah determines that the best way to prepare his students for Torah study is to tell a joke. For Rabbah, the laughter is an attempt to put nerves at ease and create space for hearts and minds to be opened to possibility. He embarks on a journey of study, having felt the power of sharing a moment of humor.
Okay. By show of hands, is anybody familiar with this source? It was my first time coming across it, so I hadn't. But has anyone seen this before? No? Okay, so really interesting and fascinating. And you can click on this hyperlink at a later point and see it in context, which is like a really cool story. But the following line is like, he had so much trepidation with what he was about to teach. It wasn't that he was going to say like, it wasn't frivolity and lightheartedness. It was like, this is the way to get into like real matters of study. And the best way to do it is to get people's nerves at ease, which is an awesome tactic. So let's assume for a minute that that happened. I don't know your experience with the GIF exercise, but obviously the pedagogic intention is, let's start off with a joke, let's start off with some laughter, let's start off getting into a good spirit, and then we can get into something heavier. My question for anyone who's open to unmuting and just chiming in is, how do we do this in the classroom? Either how do you, classroom broadly defined, like in a setting with learners, how do we use humor as a leveling kind of tactic in order to engage with matters of substance? Does anyone do this? Intentionally or not?
Well,
And I see you unmuted. Yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how this relates. I mean, it's not humor related, but it's more just setting the stage. I heard about another story, forgot the source, where, you know, all the guests come over to the table, to the dinner, and the head of the household spills the wine on the table. And in a sense, it's like, you know, it's trying to put everybody at ease for, you know, because they might be worried. What if they do something wrong? What if they, you know, put something in the wrong place? So the idea of the, you know, spilling the wine to create some sort of ease or comfort, in a sense, like the leader models doing it first or showing that it's okay just to kind of let your hair down a little bit. So this made me think of that, which I appreciate.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. If you haven't yet opened the Hospitality Spark, which is just a different program, you should look into it, because there's an awesome resource that is also showing different levels of hospitality and how a host can neutralize that space for a guest. But that reminds me of what you just shared. Anyone else? Anyone use this pedagogically, intentionally or not? Or know somebody who uses this?
I think.
All right, we'll keep it in mind. Danny, yes.
Yeah, I mean, forgive me if it's not what you're looking for, but I know as a former classroom teacher, and sometimes as a bigger human being, when you teach some younger people, and there's intimidation sometimes, and I certainly don't want that. So self-deprecating humor certainly came into play a little bit to ease, you know, to put nerves at ease, as it says there on the screen, and certainly to humanize the role sometimes of an educator or of a leader of a classroom, to make a connection that you probably can't make by always having a certain sense of formality and lack of ability to laugh as a human. That was my way.
It's cool. So two things about that come to mind. One is the whole notion of self-deprecation is apparently particularly Jewish, and that comes up in the Jewish humor section. And secondly, what's interesting is a distinction between the seriousness of the content and the seriousness of the environment in which that content is taught. And the more that we can make a distinction between, like, yeah, we can talk about issues that matter. And hopefully in this session soon, in the next 20 or 30 minutes, we'll speak about real serious things that we're all dealing with. and not to need to water those issues down at all. But in order to create that atmosphere, is like humor can actually be our best friend as a tactic without needing to compromise on the level of discourse. So
I'll add in a
we
chat.
are going.
I'll add in
Yes.
just a chat note from Michelle. I'm her voice now because she's without audio. But she wrote, I use humor because that's pretty much my personality, but you have to be careful because sometimes people don't get it and can be offended.
Amazing. Okay, good. So the more that you're able to explain it to people, the better, and not bank on people interpreting it. There's something very interesting that comes up in this spark as well, which is some things are so universal. Like you see somebody rolling over, like really clenching their stomach, you know, you can interpret that. And there's other types of laughter or humor that are just so nuanced that it's unclear how people are interpreting it, and they might need that added level. Awesome. Okay, so in this spark, we are going to explore the value of humor. And as I mentioned, the 3 chapters are what does laughter symbolize? It can represent so many different things. What's particular about Jewish humor, and what is the dark side of humor? So for our first exercise, we are actually going to do a bit of a text study. And this is one of my favorite texts, and we're going to do it in a bit of a creative way. So here's the framing for how we're getting into it. Laughing out loud. When we are so pent up with emotions, laughter is a natural release, signifying any number of feelings. Being able to laugh is part of the human condition, as we encounter in the biblical episode of Isaac's birth. Abraham and Sarah were well beyond childbearing years. And when the news arrived from angels that they would have a child, they both laughed. This was such a powerful and momentous response. It even gave a name to the child who would be born. Yitzchak, or Isaac, means literally, he who will laugh. Across geographical, socioeconomical, and political divides, there exists a universal code of laughter. The chuckle, for example, is used when you are laughing to yourself. A snicker is often used as a sign of disrespect, but what I was speaking to Michelle is, for an outsider, to discern the nuance of a laugh, though, is highly subjective. Deciphering whether laughter is joyful or painful, genuine or artificial, relies on our own interpretation. And while we sometimes misread it, circumstance and intonation can give us a glimpse into what particular laughter is meant to convey. So if you were to click over here, which we won't do right now, it would take you back to that GIF board where we started. And with this type of framing, now we have a new lens to look at that and say, what is this laughter actually conveying? It's a nervous laugh. Like, can you get into that nuance over there, knowing that it's from Schitt's Creek, knowing who the character is, knowing, like, what is this laughter, given the context that I know there's something very powerful in being an insider or an outsider in that piece. But the real interesting piece for me is how this plays out in the biblical story of Isaac's birth. So what did Abraham and Sarah's laughter really mean? I can assume a couple things, but there's no way to know for certain. So we can imagine that Abraham's laughter was a burst of joy. He would be blessed with a second child. Ishmael has already been born, but to a different wife, to Hagar, who was his first wife. Sarah's laughter might have been an exclamation of disbelief, since she was certain that her window to motherhood had passed. She was older, she had been praying, all signs pointed to her never being able to have a child, and now she's chuckling because she's told she's getting this great news. So what we're going to do now is actually break up into groups of 3 and learn the story of Isaac's namesake for yourself, and using the GIFs to interpret the story, identifying the type of laughter that was at play. Before we break you up, I want to show you 2 kind of resources. One of them is a source sheet that is appearing in the chat box if it's not yet there. And there are 2 pages to it. It's a pretty simple source sheet, which literally has the text straight out of Genesis. There's no commentary, there's no context, it's just the text as is. But the story of Isaac's birth spans 3 or 4 different chapters. It spans a long time. So we've just taken different excerpts in order to show the key points where laughter is at play. So scene 1, we see what happens when the angels tell Abraham that his wife is going to have a child. Scene 2, we go a little further and we see their response when he tells Sarah that she is going to have a child. And in scene 3, we go a little bit further and we get a glimpse into what happens when this child is born, what he's named, and a little intro to how his brother responds or the parents interact with each other, all around laughter. What's fascinating as we read this text is that laughter appears time and time again and is clearly the key element that's at play over here. but each person's laughter is signifying something completely different. There are 5 characters at play, and you're each going to get this Padlet board. And the task over here is, in your group of 3, as you're learning as much of this text as you can, try and answer the following question, which is, what is each of these characters representing? Is it disbelief? Is it excitement? Is it overwhelming? Is it joy? Is it mockery? Like, what is actually going on over here that can help us get into various types of laughter? And then just type it in the comment section directly on this board. Are there any questions before we break you into groups? We'll do this for 12 minutes or so. So you don't have to get into the whole text, but high level, reading the basic text for what it is and what you know of the story. Any questions? Okay, Haley, are you ready to send us off? Awesome, thank you. Go for it.
Oh man, okay, great.
Cool. This is great. Hey, Bobby, we need to catch up properly.
What? Hi. Yeah, nice to see you.
You know Noah, right?
Of course.
What's that?
Paris.
Do you know Noah?
I do, but why? But I thought he changed his name to Hani.
Apparently, my wife was the last one using.
Obviously, yeah. You can hover over it. No.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. But I thought it would be a good exercise for empathy to put myself in her shoes for a little bit. You doing okay, Bobby?
Bobby, are you at camp?
No.
That's a fake background. Oh,
that is my camp background, though. Because I'm always on stuff for camp, so I just keep that.
Good. It looks real. So,
Bobby, your camp background, if you were actually sitting in that exact location, I don't know where you would put your computer, but it's a good background.
I'd probably be following, looking for my walkie-talkie in the lake.
Amazing. All right, welcome back, everyone. Annie had to step out to take the other call she told us about, and Noah has just joined us. So take a minute or a couple minutes just to hear what happened in your learning over here, but I see that Abraham and Sarah have some additional interpretations. Who added those?
We did. Danny Hurt.
Amazing. All right, tell me more about it. What did Abraham's laughter signify?
Are you kidding? Disbelief.
Amazing. Disbelief.
Yeah, like, are you
Shock,
kidding?
Did I hear?
Shock.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is literally like, if there's ever a body movement that it says Vayipol al panav. He literally fell over in laughter, and this is the clear example of that. On the contrary, if Abraham was like that, when Sarah, we have the description that she is laughing to herself, or there's a bit of an internal laugh that's taking place. So how did you interpret that?
You mean with the Ben Platt GIF?
Exactly. If that's yes.
Yeah, so he got found out that he was laughing, and he sinks down his chair oh no, don't look at me. Sarah straight up lies in the text, right? And she's like, nope, I didn't do it, like that.
A, it's the craziest story that she lies. B, it's the crazier story that it matters that she lies. It seems such an insignificant piece. She laughs. Well, why did you laugh? I didn't laugh. Yes, you did laugh. And that's all that we hear about in the episode. It's so important, and I'm not sure why, but laughter is everywhere in this brief text.
And lying, right? It happens a lot, especially in the beginning of the Torah. No, I didn't do that. And then God is I can see those things.
So it makes me wonder also if the notion of, when we're uncomfortable about something, we just burst out. And sometimes it like is so there and sometimes it's internal, but maybe that's what was happening to Sarah. She was like, what am I going to do? I live in a house with another woman who I clearly have problems with, who has a child. I've been jealous all these years. I finally accepted my fate. And now you're telling me that it's disbelief. It's a whole bunch of emotions that are really happening over there that she just gets caught. Like it shows and she gets caught and she doesn't want to be seen. And therefore there's something very powerful in that moment. That's crazy. So the story continues. We're not going to spend more time getting onto it because I do want to continue on with the actual, with the spark itself. But the reason that we are looking at this text in this way, or one way we're doing it, is because, as was made very clear before, laughter can signify many different things. And there's a nuance that when one laughs at a situation or in response to their emotional struggle or experience, it is not to be interpreted as making fun of the situation, but rather is meant to just be an expression of all these emotions that are pouring out. And there's a fine line there as well. And when we talk about humor in a time of grief, or lightening the dark, or how do we make light of a situation which just seems so beyond us and just inappropriate to scoff at, laugh at, or anything, to harbor that mindset, that assume the best in people for a minute, that they're not laughing at what's happening right now, but they are just looking for some way to express their emotions. And this is one way that can be interpreted in hundreds of different ways, depending on what it is that they're feeling. And therefore, I think it's fair to assume that everybody on this webinar is dealing with hardships in totally different degrees. I think it's clear that I see camp professionals who are, not to project, but yes, to project, dealing with the hardship of, a lost summer, or, what could have been, or all the effort that, went to waste or could have still been spent potentially, but just no outlet for it, or people dealing with personal grievances and emotions and things that they're going on in their personal life that nobody would ever even know. And there are varying degrees of challenges, but there are challenges nonetheless. And therefore, what I want to do, which is a bit risky, and we'll see how this can work. And the nice part about this is it remains entirely anonymous, is I'm going to share a whiteboard. And now you should all see this white page. Do you? Yes. Okay, cool. You should see a white page. And there's a function here, which I really like to use on Zoom, which is called the annotate function. And on this whiteboard, you should see an option for text. And if you put your mouse where it says text, and then you click anywhere on the board, you start typing, then the text will appear. So there I wrote testing 1, 2, and you should be able to see it on the screen. Does everyone see that? It's cool. It's a live graffiti board. You can type anywhere. And then as the manager of the webinar, I can move them around so you're not typing on top of anybody else. So the question that I want you to address right now, really in the spirit of how we started off, by saying that you never know what somebody's dealing with. And for anybody, for varying reasons, humor can be an outlet or just an expression of the grief, the challenges that one is dealing with. I think it would be beneficial, or at least cathartic, for everyone to write down a challenge, and you can choose something that happened today, something that happened 15 years ago, something that happened 2 months ago, that is still weighing on you, that we'll discuss how humor might be able to fit into this, but just to really populate these, and all to varying degrees. So if you want to keep it blank, I'm not forcing anyone to write, but if you are able to write something, just things that you are grieving of all, or grieving is a strong word, things that you are challenged by, some potentially heavy and some not necessarily, but consuming, something that warrants a release is where I'm going with this. So click the text function and just write a phrase, a sentence, something that is kind of just weighing on you. And if you wrote one, you can write 3 of them. It really does not matter.
If you're stuck on the draw feature, whoever drew the line, if you just go back to the top black bar, you should see something that says text, and you should be able to type that way.
So take a minute to just review this. If you've already typed something, read and just for a minute recognize what things you may have known about some people on this call and what things you definitely did not know about people on this call that we're all walking around with and are real and legitimate and challenging and consuming. Just take a minute to review this board. Okay. And there's varying degrees, but they're all consuming and they're all challenging. And if anybody, for whatever reason, wants to save this list, so it's something you can go back to, the way to do that on this black bar at the top, all the way on the right, it says save, and you press that button, and then it takes a screenshot of this whiteboard, which I'll be deleting in a minute. So if you want to do that, you have another 3 seconds to do so. 1, 2, 3. And I really appreciate everybody for jumping right in, because this is definitely requiring some vulnerability. So picture this, the thing you wrote and maybe something that somebody else wrote. And I'm going to stop sharing this for a moment. And I'm going to start sharing. Give me a minute back here. Something which I think is not new to everybody, but seeing some of these statistics, I think are really, or these facts are really interesting about humor therapy and how humor therapy is one way that people are able to kind of cope with some of the challenges that they're dealing with. What I found so interesting is that at the top, researchers say that children laugh 300 times a day and adults perhaps 15 times a day. So wherever that stat came from, but there's clearly a need to be more childlike and playful and make space for that. And I love also that the sound of laughter is contagious. It's more contagious than anything else that one might think is contagious. And we do have that domino effect that when you see someone else laughing, you just want to laugh. This is exactly what went into the design principle of how we created the Spark with that opening video, which I didn't show on this call, but if you open up the Spark, it says, click here, and you're just looking at somebody laughing for a minute. And it's hilarious universally to see somebody else laugh because it's contagious. And it is medicinal without going into all these benefits. Haley, if you can add this link in the chat box just so people can access this on their own, because this isn't part of the Spark. But one of the reasons that I'm sharing this is because humor is not a natural outlet for everybody, but it certainly is for some. And for those of you who do find solace in laughter, or who have found solace in laughter based on what you wrote on the whiteboard before or not, I'm actually gonna just look at us and not the shared screen anymore. I would love to hear how you have used or are using or could use laughter as a helpful coping mechanism. And how you try and find lightness and joy when we know it's good for you, but it opens things up and is not so simple. So the floor is yours. Take a minute, unmute when you're ready. And if anyone can share how you are using or could use laughter or humor as a coping mechanism for what you wrote on the board. And is it ever too soon to use humor or?
I can go. So I had a baby during the peak of the pandemic in Manhattan, in New York. Do not recommend. And one of the ways that I've been using laughter that has been interesting is like, she's learning how to laugh. So for a couple of weeks, babies are like potatoes. And then she started laughing and like reacting to things that I'm doing that like I usually, Bobby can tell you, I spend a lot of time trying to be humorous. You don't have to try really hard with a baby. You can like stick out your tongue, but she laughs and it's so magical. And I was like, all right, this is going to be okay. This is very far outside of like my usual use of humor, but it's been pretty incredible to like watch a person learn how to laugh.
Awesome. Sarah Beth, I remember you at the last seminar we were at together, you shared that little pocket book. There were like 2 or 3 versions of it, right? All My Friends Are Dead, yes. Can you speak a little bit about it and why you find so much power in that book? Yeah, so some background for everyone is that I was widowed in my 20s, and I spent a lot of time like figuring out how to deal with that. And teaching about grief and having people be able to process grief. And that book came out, All My Friends Are Dead, which is a cartoon book for grown-ups. I mean, I guess kids wouldn't mind it, but they wouldn't get the like deep existential meaning behind it. And I use it to teach all the time when I'm doing these grief things. But looking at a picture of like a cartoon of a carton of milk saying all of my friends expired on Tuesday can help you deal with whatever grief it is that you're dealing with. All My Friends Are Bread is also a good one. Like taking the sarcasm and then thinking about, yeah, all my friends expired on Tuesday. And also like, I'm really upset because I don't know if my kid is going to go to college remotely next year. I saw someone wrote on the whiteboard. Like, how can you dig into your feelings about that, thinking about like having a chuckle at an expired carton of milk or being stranded on a desert island or being an obsolete cassette tape. That's another page of the book. And so I love that book. It's very useful. And that's some of the reasons why. I love that you remember that, Kiva. Thank you. Of course I remember that, and I can't wait to read your memoir. Sarah Beth just wrote a book, for those of you who don't know. It hasn't been published yet, but it is on its way, and she promised autographed copies to anybody who asks. Right. Wow. Thank you for sharing, Sarah Beth. Anyone else? Noah.
So my 103-year-old great aunt, she's live and be well. She came down with pneumonia a couple of weeks ago, and so she went into the hospital already like, you know, everyone's thinking this is going to be it. And so for the first 2 days she was there, she wasn't eating, and her daughter like got in touch with the clinicians, and they said, well, she's starting to eat again. And so they finally got her on the phone. She can't hear a damn thing. She can't really see very well. And she said, I was waiting for the angel of death to come around, and the bastard never showed up, so I'm eating again. And then on top of that, they said an hour later, she with her walker was teaching all the nurses Israeli folk dance. And they were like, nothing can keep this woman down. Like, she should probably go home. And so the next picture that we saw of her was when she was home with a nurse, and they were wearing like these teenage style like pajamas together, and they were doing Israeli folk dance. And she said like, I'm ready to go, but I'm not going out without a party. And I just like, it's so definitively her that
wow.
That was crazy. So we're all like, our whole family's crying on a Zoom call, like reading the emails about all this and laughing at the same time. And we couldn't decide, like there was a tension. Are we laughing because we're sad, or we're laughing because like this is just such a powerful lesson in life?
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And I'm sure, true to what we said earlier, like it's probably all those emotions, and for each person kind of a different combination.
Right. And I found that sometimes like laughter is an expression of an overflow of a lot of emotions at the same time. It's,
yeah.
It's cathartic. It's very cathartic.
Wow. I'll share one quick story, and then I know we're kind of out of time, so anyone who needs to hop off, that's totally fine. I was speaking to Stephen, and I'm going to butcher this, but he mentioned something to me. He said, like, over the last couple of days, he found out that a very close child, Stephen works with us in M Squared, for those who don't know, and he said that a childhood friend of his was just informed that he has lung cancer. And very, very, very difficult news for him to digest and to deal with and all that. And is kind of common practice in some Jewish, in some Jewish practices. An email went out which said, I've assigned you these verses of Psalms that you're required to go ahead and read in memory of this, or in hope that this person will receive healing, really quickly. And on the one, some people are like so excited to get those messages, and some people are like, damn it, like this is a burden. I have to do this right now. That's just different responses to getting a request like that. No one wants to not do it because it's for a good friend. And if there's any chance it'll help, then of course. And Stephen was kind of joking with this guy, and he's speaking to his friend on the phone and saying, someone just sent this to me, and I'm signed up to go ahead and learn for you, but I don't really know if I'm gonna be able to. And he goes, okay, so if I have a few bad days, I know I'm gonna be able to attribute it to you. And they were able to turn it into a joke and really talk about it. And it became a way that they can get into this conversation about something so heavy that they were able to both see themselves in it and have a good chuckle. So I appreciated when he shared that with me. I know we're nearly out of time. So a couple of thoughts I want to leave you with is, number one, the question about when do you notice that if you have allowed yourself to use humor in a difficult situation, or if you've even held yourself back from using humor. If you go back to that board and something you wrote or saw somebody else write that maybe you've been in a similar situation, can humor be cathartic to you, noting that it can represent so many different things? It doesn't have to be offensive or laughing at the situation, but it's about your way of dealing with it. Thinking about how it's received by others and in what ways it's cathartic to you. And big questions about if it's ever too soon to use humor, which I don't have an answer for that, but I think it's definitely something to think about. And my last thing that I want to, just as a segue for how you can get into chapter 2, if you were to when you're continuing to learn the spark on your own, is that joking in a time of crisis is often very dark, and it requires making fun of oneself or one situation. And ironically, this is one of the defining pieces of Jewish humor, which is that notion of self-deprecating, or really looking at ourselves and making fun of our own situations. Maybe it's because Jews have had so many hardships, or Jews think they've had so many hardships. I don't really know. But regardless, we kind of look in, and that defines one of the defining pieces of Jewish humor. So as you go into chapter 2 of the Spark and try and get a brief history over what is Jewish humor, what defines it, and click on 2 clips that we've included there, I really encourage you to watch those clips with as much authenticity as possible. And where are you laughing out loud, and where are you saying this has gone too far? And what does Jewish humor, if anything, tell you about your own notion or connection to humor? So with that, enjoy the learning. Thank you for really being all in with this. I know it's a light, but also a heavy topic. I will stay online if anyone wants to stick on and ask more questions or continue for a few minutes, but anyone else is welcome to log off. And it's really great to see you all. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kiva.
Thanks, Kiva. Kiva, I have a preview from the book about self-deprecating, inappropriate use of humor, if you're interested.
I am always interested. Please send it to me.
But no, I'll tell you. It's
great.
But I will tell you. So I didn't, at Shiva for like a decade ago, there were all these people like lined up, and they weren't saying anything to me, and they weren't moving, and I like didn't realize what was happening, and I realized that I was supposed to speak first, but they were all like his family's friends from their minyan, so like I didn't know them. And so I started going, would you like to comfort me amongst those who mourn for Zion in Jerusalem? And so my best friend punched me and told me to stop it. He like punched me in the side and was like, you have to stop it.
Amazing.
But that's a real thing that I did.
Good. I mean, people need it. It's so, I don't know, it's uncomfortable, but it's when it happens and like there's space for humor, it is the most contagious thing ever. But to get into it is just, there's so many barriers. So
yeah,
I don't know, you make it easy.
I once banged a car door and it was really stupid and it was totally my fault and it cost like $3,000 to get it repaired. And a good friend said to me at some point, like, can you laugh about it yet? And it was like this like moment of transitioning from like being really pissed and angry or upset or whatever it was to like, in the grand scheme of things, like everybody, I was okay. Nobody was like hurt, but it was like this moment of when can you actually, when is it, it's sort of like what you're talking about, when is it okay to laugh about?
Mm-hmm. This reminds me of the SNL skit, which happened after 9/11, where after 9/11, there was questions like, what is Saturday? How do we do this? And then they get on, and this was actually the original intro to this version of the Spark, and we moved things around a bit. But they just said, is now the time? When can we laugh? Is it ever too late? And they just start, and they get back into things.
Yeah,
and
no,
really
Giuliani told Lorne Michaels, why start being funny now? That was the line.
Correct. Yeah, why start being funny now? Like that's, you know, like it's amazing.
That Patch Adams story, there was a guy who was just miserable and like wanted to die. And so he came in dressed as an angel and started reading all the different slang terms about death. And it's just so powerful because like at the end of the day, the darkest situations in life, there's humor behind it. And that's one of the things that like people don't realize, that it actually builds a level of resilience, that when you can laugh at something, even the hardest thing to laugh at, it actually, you start seeing that this challenge, behind that challenge, there's something there that's like worthwhile. There's something there to hold on to.
Which is an interesting take on the blessing that Sarah gives for her son Isaac, Yitzchak, when he's born. It says, I'm naming my son Yitzchak because I want, so it will essentially be contagious, meaning so that others will know of this. And that's if you look at source number 3 that's on that sheet over there, maybe it's literally this. It's like, this is somebody who's being born with the sense of resilience and is going to have a hard life. And look at, he's coming into the family dynamics are not normal here or easy to deal with. And, you know, and like, maybe that's what laughter signifies there, like the ability to be humorous in all these situations and find humor and let that spread to others. Maybe that's the most prized gift that we can receive or inherit.
I think also, I was just thinking, I remember things that are funny because like laughter is very physical, like in M-squared language, it makes things more concrete. So I don't know why I remember this. But the stupidest thing, Shuki at the beginning of one of the seminars, like stood up and talked about big bowls of lettuce. It was like some inside joke.
Yeah.
What it was, but like it was funny at the time. It's not funny now, but I remember the content. I don't.
Oh yeah, that was on the evaluation forms. People said that we don't give enough lettuce, we give too much lettuce. We're complaining about big bowls of lettuce. It's a true story. So yeah, it's we remember those things. That's why as the spark ends, the final piece of it is like, to the extent that it can serve as a meditation exercise, is get back in that mindset. Like find that one time that you were really rolling over laughing, that like was such a moment you will never forget in your life. And how can you potentially recreate that or relive that moment? Because we remember those things and they symbolize so much, and they happen so infrequently for some of us. So there's a real power in being able to recall those. Anyway,
in the text,
all right.
Do you know if in the text is like Sarah see Abraham laughing, or do they each laugh in separate places? I was just thinking about laughter being contagious and sort of the string from Abraham laughing and then Sarah and then Isaac.
So I don't think, no, Sarah doesn't see him because she gets the news separately, which is why only in the next scene does she hear. So she didn't overhear. According to the basic interpretation of this, it would have been a separate. But such visceral reactions, keep laughing inside, falling over and laughing, get reprimanded for laughing. Like this story is filled with like, I don't know, a lot of depth about
really dark, awkward moment laughter, which is so like fantastically, painfully hilarious. So those are great moments.
Yeah. I mean, I also wonder if Abraham threw himself on his face and laughed because he's thinking like, oh shit, like you know, we wanted this, but I know like Hagar, Ishmael, what is going to happen here? We were past this. We've accepted the fate already. Like, I'm 100 years old. Sarah's 90. This is never going to happen. Like, and now you're throwing, like, maybe it's a blessing. Maybe he's like, oh my God, what just happened here? You don't know. So until you're there and you see it in person, that nuance, the intonation, the circumstance tells us everything. But if not, and like no one is ever really in someone else's place, you see someone laugh and you don't really know the story behind it, but you can see the universalism and also try and empathize with the particular piece of it too.
Who's the next one to be on flying?
The next one is going to be on the value of independence in preparation for the 4th of July. So that's coming out next week.
Thank you.
We're hopping around.
That's
all right. It's really great to see you all. All right. I'll see you all later. Thank you, Haley.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.